organization, check and see which affiliate may be local to you and encourage you to join that affiliate. More information about that can be found at WiCyS.org. So if you want to go check that out, it'll give you availability to attend events like this. It'll give you great opportunity to see some of our job boards with our strategic partners. But the best part of all is giving you that community of spectacular women in the cyber arena who can be a resource or a mentor or possibly offer you a job someday. So I encourage you to become active with us and see all the things that WiCyS can do for you. But I want to stay on track for time. So I am excited to have with us today from FTI Consulting. We've got Jordan Kelly with us today, who's the head of cybersecurity for the Americas. And then we also have one of our fabulous male allies, Ron Yearwood, who is also with FTI with he's the West Coast lead for cybersecurity. I will have them on the line. And just a couple of quick things, housekeeping. The chat box will be open during both sessions today, so please feel free to drop your questions in there. We'll leave some time at the end to cover those question and answer for you. There'll also be a slide at the end that will have everyone's contact information on it. So if there's something that you want to follow up with one of us today, you'll have the ability to reach out directly and do that as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our two featured guests for today, Jordan and Ron. I'll let them do a little self-introduction and I'll leave it with you.
Thanks so much, Stacey. I'll go first since you mentioned my name first. As Stacey said, I'm Jordan Kelly. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I'm the head of cybersecurity for the Americas at FTI Consulting, which is a global business advisory firm. And I joined FTI about 2.5 years ago. And my most recent role prior to this was I served as the director for cyber incident response on the National Security Council at the White House for about 2 years, where I was involved in the drafting of the first U.S. government cyber strategy in about 15 years. And I also had a role in managing the process for discussing vulnerability equities across the U.S. government. And prior to that, I spent about 12 years in the FBI. My last role at the FBI was serving as the chief of staff of the cyber division, mostly working on strategy, risk, policy, government affairs, public affairs, all things related to the management of a large cybersecurity program. So I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys today. And Ron, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jordan. Great to be with everyone today. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to speak to everyone. Ron Yearwood, I'm one of the senior managing directors for the FTI Consulting cybersecurity practice. I'm the West Coast lead in developing the cybersecurity practice. I've worked with Jordan for several years, a lot of overlap in a number of different places that she was just talking about. I retired from the FBI in 2019. In March of 2019, I've been with FTI for the 2 years after that as a senior managing director. Number of different opportunities within the FBI in my 23 years of service, from multiple field offices to assignments overseas. Some really great experience opportunities. In my last 4 years, I was section chief or senior executive within the FBI at FBI headquarters in the cyber division, working on Eurasian cyber operations, and then also on some really advanced technical countermeasures. And I will close with that so that we can get right into our subject matter.
Ben, I'll let you go ahead and put that slide up if you want to. So our first topic for today is going to be threats to our everyday lives, cyber risks to critical infrastructure. Jordan, looks like maybe you're going to start for us.
Sure. So I think that this is a topic that affects every single one of us because we really live and breathe by the critical infrastructures that run our lives. And those critical infrastructures live on the cybersecurity world, right? Everything we use, from our power, our water, our homes, our work, our computers, is all run online. And so all critical infrastructures, both those that are defined as critical infrastructures by the US government, but also all of the things that are critical to us, our phones, our laptops, our cars, are all driven on systems that are really connected to other systems and connected to the global World Wide Web. And so the threats to these different types of systems, real critical infrastructure and our critical infrastructure, can be very impactful. We've seen in the last year some of those impacts coming to life. You might have read in the news around the time of the Super Bowl, there was a real live actual threat to the water system in a city in Florida that was very near the Super Bowl where it was being played and hosted. And it could have been impactful to players in the communities and those who were able to go and visit the game. And so the ability for one bad individual or for a nation state to really wreak havoc on our everyday lives is something that I worry about every day. So these are the types of cybersecurity threats that aren't the ransomware that you hear about in the news, although they might be ransomware if they are locking down critical infrastructure that really makes our everyday possible.
Yeah, following on to Jordan, she's spot on in the assessment. It really has become everything that we do. As interconnected as the global community has become, it permeates every facet of our lives, from mobile phones to your refrigerators to the system that we're working on now. All of these things are connected in various different ways. And the more that the elements within society transfer from traditional service to online, being in a virtual capacity, the more at risk they are to different types of vulnerabilities. And Jordan highlighted ransomware, just one of the many tools that an adversary can use to potentially have an impact, whether it's disruption of service, damage to a system, or just holding a service hostage from the populace that needs it. There are more formal definitions of what the critical infrastructures are and what the threats are to them. Simply stated, it really is just about everything. I know when we talk about the different sectors of critical infrastructure, there are specific areas that we talk about, from communications all the way to water systems. But it really is everything, and it permeates just about everything that we do, that we touch today in our modern lives, as that more and more becomes online and virtual.
Right. And we are going to talk a little bit about that with the cyber. You mentioned the water tax. We're going to get a little bit later and we'll talk about a specific example of that. But recently, FTI held a simulation exercise where they focused on the cyber attacks to some critical infrastructure. Can you tell us a little bit about that exercise, a little background on the event and what you guys did, the service that you provide with that?
Yeah, I'll be glad to highlight a little bit about the exercise. It's a series of exercises called the Jack Voltaic series. It's a coordinated series of exercises hosted by the Army Cyber Institute. These are conducted in the context of research and study via implementation of a cyber exercise. The series of exercises helps the study of incident response and different challenges in responding to real world events via that exercise environment. It's a safe place. It promotes side-by-side partnership and collaboration. Gives the participants an opportunity to focus on critical infrastructure and how the interdependencies of those infrastructures can be impacted by a cyber event. The whole focus is to give opportunity to learn in a safe environment. The one that we participated in was Jack Voltaic 3.0, JV 3.0, in collaboration with the Army Cyber Institute. We were partnered with a number of other agencies and entities utilizing this bottom-up approach, looking to gain insight from multiple levels of industry and government as to how a cyber attack could specifically impact on commercial critical infrastructure elements in this exercise, via this exercise. There have been 3 in the series, one in New York in 2016, one in Houston in roughly 2018, and then this one last September. Participants from Charleston, South Carolina, Savannah, Georgia, participated in the exercise. The exercise, and this is one of the unique parts of this exercise, this go round, it was held completely and totally virtually because of the pandemic. Recognizing interdependencies in critical infrastructures, the Army Cyber Institute has been working to increase the collaboration amongst their partners and various participants. Being one of the primary critical infrastructure elements, they recognize they fit into the overall critical infrastructure mesh that is our society. They also recognize that there are weak links. And so in that context of we're only as strong as your weakest link, they're working to better the overall status, capability, resiliency, and response perspective by using this exercise to help teach and to train. This series of exercises provides a framework for collaboration, that safe environment that I mentioned. And like I said, this iteration specifically was different because of the pandemic, completely in a virtual environment that it was hosted. But it also explored how cyber disruptions on civilian critical infrastructure elements could impact on the Army's ability to protect forces, move resources, and implement their critical mission.
Jordan, do you have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, no, it's just a great event, a great real world practical example of how those that are on the front lines responding can get prepared, because these aren't the types of events that we see every day, but when they do happen, they really are worst case scenarios. So it's great to have an experience like this, and Ron led that for our team, and it was a wonderful outcome.
And do you have more of those exercises planned in the future? I'm assuming based on the success of those you've held already.
So what we are hosting a number of different exercises in a number of different venues. The Jack Voltaic series is being considered for next iteration. One of the things that they have built into considerations as far as what's next is the potential for additional virtual implementation, but boxing the program and the exercise for other municipalities, county, state, other government agencies to facilitate the exercises on their own, as opposed to having to be led by a single entity. They're putting together the program with as many resources that they can deliver to provide others the opportunity of implementing that program and the exercise, the next iterations of the exercise series, independent of a single large organized coordinating body.
Okay. And I'm sure that that business hopefully will, unfortunately, I should say, continue with the prevalence. I think it was yesterday I saw again there was another school system. So I don't think that's anything that's going away anytime soon. So I know that you talked about it being a simulated cyber attack, but as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, the water plant treatment in Florida was targeted. So can you talk a little bit about what you see from that side, and then how you are designing those to try to counter and try to set people up for success for those types of attacks?
Sure. The water system attack that we're referencing happened just last year, this year, is just before the Super Bowl in Tampa, and cyber actors gained unauthorized access to the SCADA systems, the supervisory control systems at the water treatment plant. The actor increased the chemical compositions, specifically lye, and introduction of that the additional chemical into the water treatment plant. Fortunately, the attack itself was caught very, very quickly. The plant personnel recognized, saw this, and they corrected it before it could have a more serious consequence. The expectation, the understanding is that this actor exploited what would be a remote desktop sharing program, sharing software application on an older version of Windows. And this highlights a couple of different challenges that exist, not only in critical infrastructures, but more broadly, dated software or dating operating systems, updating network resources, both hardware and software. In this instance, while the software itself, the sharing software, has legitimate uses, they are seen in a regular context being used by malicious actors for a variety of different purposes. And so when that software, either the operating system or the applications, are not kept up to date, they could be exploited, just as this was in this instance. And so fortunately, this one was caught, has an extraordinary potential for significant consequences, but it really is one in a series of wake-up calls when it comes to critical infrastructure elements, and the potential impact that threat actors can have, not only from a financial perspective, but more importantly from a societal perspective, and the cost for real human lives, the potential to harm people through critical infrastructure exploitation is significant.
So yeah, you talk about those potential consequences on various levels with different victims in those instances. So Jordan, can you talk a little bit about maybe what recommendations organizations can take to maybe mitigate some of those threats, or best practices, or things when you work with your clients, what you kind of highlight for them as best practices?
Sure. I mean, there are some hands-on technical steps that I think probably everyone who has joined us today won't be surprised to hear, right? Making sure that you're up to date, making sure that you're patching, making sure that you've instituted multi-factor authentication into all of your environments, in particular your email environment. Over and over again, I work with companies and I get there and I figure out right away they don't have multi-factor authentication, and that alone is the reason for why they have been compromised. In the case of the water plant situation, it was a shared username and password that everyone knew and had access to. And that's the kind of thing that when an employee leaves, they might remember that the password is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they can still wreak havoc even when they're no longer part of that trusted circle of users. So that multi-factor authentication is a step that is just so valuable. Using strong passwords, I personally recommend a password manager. I use LastPass, and there's a free version of that. And I know sometimes it can be hard to make the move and pull the trigger to get onto a system like LastPass or another password manager, but once you start using it, you'll never go back. It's so efficient and so secure. And then there are other security steps like making sure you have the right antivirus in place, making sure your firewalls are up to date, making sure that they're configured for the latest threats, because you are trusting your antivirus software to be responsible for catching the ransomware and the other issues that might be coming your way. And then there's also internal auditing of your systems, understanding what logs you have in place, understanding that those logs are capturing what information and for how long they're being stored. Some organizations I work with have so many great logging capabilities, but they are logging so much that because of the capacity, they're overriding it on a daily basis. So that great logging becomes somewhat less valuable when I can only see back a few hours. So those are all the technical things that you can do. But one thing as a line to remember is when it comes to cybersecurity, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. So the things that are related to people, the things that are related to us making cultural decisions about security are always going to be the places where we're going to have the greatest challenges. Just decisions about making strong password requirements, decisions about rotating those passwords. These are things that we have to agree, whether as individuals or whether we're part of an organization, to make a commitment that we're going to be doing things that might be a little bit more difficult for us, but that are ultimately going to keep us all secure. But at the same time, we walk a fine line because we have to be really conscientious that we don't make security so robust and so limiting that people are constantly looking for ways to get around the security measures that we've put in place. So for those of you here on the call, and I bet all of you are probably evangelists of cybersecurity, these are all the types of different levels and balance that we have to consider as we're implementing all these measures. So we can do so many technical things, but at the end of the day, the people are what matters. And we have to figure out how to thread the needle to keep people prioritizing cybersecurity without making their lives, their jobs, and their outcomes more difficult to achieve.
All right, thanks, Jordan. Ron, do you have anything to add to that for recommendations that Jordan didn't cover?
Man, she covered so much. That was an extraordinary summation, particularly the last part. And I'll just pile on top of that and then make a very limited specific comment. But Jordan's spot on, just absolutely spot on. Security is essential, and you're all advocates of, and we recognize that, or you wouldn't be here listening to this conversation. Making security part of every day is critical, but we can't make it so hard and complicated and challenging that nobody wants to do it. RDP, we've talked about it a bunch. It's as a concept, very important to being able to administer effectively a network and network resources, but also not necessarily something that everybody has to have access to. And so the concept of that previous breach where everybody had an access password and it was common so that it could be utilized amongst a broad number of users, very, very challenging to secure, obviously led to a breach. We talk about that same context in administrative accounts. And so to Jordan's point of being balanced in the approach, it's about having the right people with the right access to the right information at the right time for the right reasons, and ensuring then that where that access and those access points aren't needed, that we lock those things down. But it is a culture, Jordan's point. It is a culture, it can be a culture shift and a culture change, but it needs to be a culture that's adopted by all of us. So finding that balance is critical. Jordan was spot on in her assessment.
Great. Well, we are getting a little close on time. We're about a minute or two ahead, but Ben, I'm gonna throw it to you for a second, have you take a look at the chat, and then I know you had some questions that folks had sent in early. If you have some of those that maybe we didn't cover today during this first session. And I did forget to mention that at the start, we do have 2 sessions, so hopefully y'all will be able to stay for both sessions today. This is our first one, and then we'll stay on. We've got a second one coming up. He's a little bit more with the nation state threat actors. But Ben, let me turn that over to you. We'll close out this session, and then we'll roll into the next one shortly.
Thanks, Stacy. Let me just pull up some questions.
And I apologize, Ben, I did not introduce you on the call. If you want to introduce yourself to folks. He's also with the FTI team supporting us today.
Yep, that's basically it. No further intro really needed. We can jump right into the questions. So basically, this one is kind of centered around who is responsible for ensuring that critical infrastructure is secured and protected. Is this the government's job, or how exactly should that work in an ideal situation?
Well, I'll start and just say that cybersecurity is really a team sport. And so the owners and operators of critical infrastructure are really relying on private citizens to operate safely online, as well as the government to provide information that they have available. But I think the root of that question is that people often think that the government has the secret recipe for cybersecurity and cyber safety. And the truth is that they really do not. And I don't think that anyone from the government would be upset about me saying that. The government doesn't really own and operate a lot of the online spaces, and they also don't necessarily own and operate a lot of critical infrastructure. If you think about the financial sector, it's largely operated by the financial institutions, right? And so the government can do everything they can to provide accurate information to the financial sector, but the financial sector has great information because they're the ones who are on the receiving end of these threats. So the reason why I open that by saying it's a team sport is that there's not one right answer, and that the answer is that everyone who contributes to online safety really has to play an equal role in securing, sharing, and doing all the right things to achieve the outcomes of protecting our critical infrastructure.
Yeah, Jordan's again spot on. I think I'm unnecessary in this discussion. It's a symbiotic relationship amongst all of us. And Jordan mentioned the financial sector, and it's a great place to really focus in this specific question. They can't do it without intelligence and information from the government. The government can't help protect them without critical relationships that are just essential to having the right type of conversations. And the financial institutions are significantly dependent upon users, the everyday user being as educated, capable, and aware of the cybersecurity threats that are out there. It's a very symbiotic relationship amongst everyone.
I agree. I think one of the questions most of the time we get when we have these sessions, and Jordan, you hit on that, was the password managers, that it really is a mindset change that people say, oh no, that's too much, or I'm going to lose a password, or, they'll see that string of letters and numbers combos coming out. I can't remember all that. And then, and I always, it seems like in the last probably half dozen, we've got always get that, well, what's your thoughts on password managers? Do you recommend one? So I think that is key. Like you said, it's just having to think differently, but not make it so difficult that now you can't do business because you have too many. So I think it's that balance, but also that mindset change.
And I think, Stacy, to that point, just to give you guys a story that to take away, and maybe we'll be reminiscent in your own cybersecurity lives and careers. As right after I started working here at FTI, we were doing some work to ensure that our own systems were as protected as they could be. And in doing that evaluation and auditing, we encountered some what we thought were issues with our multi-factor authentication. And we thought, to be totally honest with you, we discovered this over the weekend, and it was a 4-alarm fire, a very serious threat we thought that we had detected. And it didn't take all of that long until we determined that the accounts that were facing this issue, where it seemed like maybe multi-factor authentication had been beaten by a threat actor, no, that's not what happened. Yeah, each of the people that were encountering that situation had called our help desk and had asked to have multi-factor authentication turned off of their accounts. because they weren't able to do what they wanted to do. And so I always, when I talk to different groups and I talk to different industries, the industry I worry about the most is the hospitality industry, because the hospitality industry is all about making sure you have a great experience. It's a customer service industry. And so we have to train ourselves and our IT professionals that you can't always get what you want when it comes to cybersecurity. So when someone calls and says, I can't remember a new password, I need to be able to use my old one, or I can't get this second factor installed and now my iPad's not working, that we have to really work, particularly with people that might not be technology natives, to inform them about why these security measures are so important, and then also to make sure that they don't try to take steps to render them invalid. Because that was a really, a funny story now. And I hope that my CEO never hears me tell that story, but it just goes to show that all it took was one call to say, hey, I'd like to have this disabled. I mean, candidly, many organizations operate that way. If you think about the things that you'd like to do to your machine, if you're working in a professional environment, you might get a note that says, you can only do this if you're an admin. Well, you might work somewhere that if you call and say, hey, I need to be made into an admin on my machine, they might do that for you. Now, that gives you the authorities to do more things on your device, but it also gives you the authority to be a greater target and someone that can wreak more damage on a network. And so I think that we have to remember that the people aspect, that customer service aspect, is really the piece that can undermine all of the great technical measures that we put into place. So just thinking about changing our mindset is so important.
Oh, somebody has... Oh, that's an excellent point, Megan. I thought the same thing when she said that. So she's commented that.
Yeah, I won't sing it, but yeah, that's definitely true. It's not, cybersecurity is not here to make your lives easier. In fact, I mean, to tell you how much of it's social engineering, I was in the process of providing an expert testimony to a court, and the opposing side said she's a cybersecurity expert, but what she's talking about is not cybersecurity. She's talking about essentially fraud and social engineering. And I said to the judge, they're inextricable. The cybersecurity and social engineering, you can't talk about them separately because it is such a critical part of these threats.
And it all happens online. And every day, all of it is transferred. Everything that was the world of yesterday and things that happened in the world of yesterday is all transferred to a digital format now. And I also have that song in my head, and I was everything that I could do not to start singing.
So I think that's the perfect note to end on. You can mute or turn your camera, mute your mic, do your happy dance, finish your song, and that'll give us time to roll into our next topic. So I want to thank everybody that stuck with us for this first session. For the questions that we had, Ben, thanks for that. I appreciate it. Jordan and Ron, great topic on that. So I think we're going to go ahead and move into our next topic. This is unusual. Normally I end up running behind time. So today we're doing well. We're sticking right on time. So we're going to roll into the next one about how you defend the indefensible. We'll talk a little bit about nation-state cyber threats a little bit. I don't know, Jordan or Ron, which of y'all want to kick off this session? For those of you that have to leave us, I just want to reiterate that if you are not a member of the Women in Cybersecurity organization, definitely visit the WiCyS.org, find your local affiliate. Like I said, you can find some spectacular women there that can provide mentorship opportunities to you. We'd love to see you in Denver for our annual conference coming up this year. It will be in person. Hopefully with the COVID situation, we are turning a curve. So some of these virtual events will become in-person events, and maybe at some point, Ron, Jordan, you guys can be involved with us there too. But with no further ado then, I'll let y'all take it for session number 2.
Ron, I'll let you start.
So nation-state actors, they're also known as advanced persistent threats. We hear a number of different terms utilized to describe these particular actors. And what we've seen, and I'll talk about this in just a bit, there's some blending between what we would qualify as criminal hackers or criminal actors, traditional actors with a specific purpose in mind, and the nation-state actors. But in general, when we talk about nation-state actors or advanced persistent threats, we're talking about groups or individuals who are backed by other, we say advanced threats, nation states, people who have deeper pockets, entities that are not necessarily singularly or overly focused on financial benefit in the activities that they commit. There can be a host of different purposes for which they're engaged in their activities. However, the hallmarks are they're much better financed. Their capabilities are above and beyond what the average hacker group would be seen as far as using tactics, techniques, and procedures. So very, very capable. They're well financed. They have a lot of time to implement their attacks. And typically they sit on a network when they're engaging in an attack for a long period of time to really study, know what they're doing on a network in an attack cycle, and to really learn about the location that they plan to exploit, compromise, exploit, and exfiltrate data. Like one of the things that I mentioned was we see some blurring in the lines between criminal and nation state actors. Some of the techniques that are critical in crucial to successful nation state attacks are used in criminal attacks by threat actors who are looking for financial compensation, threat actors who would compromise a system to gain something back in return, something that they can monetize. Some of those techniques are used across both the threat actor sets. And so it can be hard to differentiate at times between the two different groups. But again, hallmarks for the nation state actors, they're looking for information data, they're executing attacks in a different context for a different purpose, and they stay on network for a longer period of time because most typically they implement techniques that give them a less likelihood of being caught, particularly not in a very expeditious fashion. And I'll hold there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Ron, you set the stage. So what do we do about it, right? How do we defend against people that have that level of sophistication, that level of commitment? One thing I often say when I'm talking to companies about these types of risks is you're not talking about somebody just doing this for fun or somebody trying to make a few bucks. You're talking about someone who is going in and clocking in every day for a job, and they have a target list. And so think about it in the way of, you literally are an employee at one of these nation state hacker groups, and they say you need to hit company X, company Y, you get a bonus if you get into company Z, and you might be company Z. So what are you going to do if this is literally someone's job? This is literally someone's personal security in the country where they live is contingent upon them getting into your systems. So what do? You do a lot of the things that you might have already heard us talk a little bit about. You do a lot of the things to keep your network secure, but you have to be even more highly sensitized to the threats, because there are many cyber attacks right now that we're seeing, ransomware, for example, that the targets that are being victimized are targets of opportunity. So ransomware actors are looking to make money. I would say a quick buck, but they're making in the millions of bucks, but they're looking to make a quick million. And so they want to see which door handle they can shake and get into. The nation state actors, they don't care if your front door is locked and your back door is locked and your windows are bolted down. They're going to find the most creative entry point. They might go to the grocery store and befriend your grandma to get invited over to a birthday party. So that's the difference in securing your house and then being on the lookout for something that's totally unexpected. One way that we're seeing nation state actors target companies is by connecting with their employees in non-traditional ways. So whether that means connecting with their employees on LinkedIn and having a persona, right? So there could be another Jordan Kelly persona that is really, let's say, a Chinese actor, and I'm connecting with Stacy and I say, Stacy, great to meet you. I have this really interesting program that I think you'd like to learn more about. Click on this link. Stacy could click on that link and download a remote action tool, a malware kit, onto her own, whether it's her personal computer, her work computer. And so I walk a fine line. There are definitely people who come from government backgrounds and other backgrounds where they've really had the full, their eyes wide open to the really vastness and sophistication of these threats. And they say, as a result, I don't do anything online. I don't have Facebook. I don't do LinkedIn. Look, I don't live that way, but I live my life knowing that every data point I give out into the world about me is something that puts not just me at risk, but puts my company at risk. Because look, no one's trying to hack Jordan Kelly's Gmail. You wouldn't find much other than a million spam lists, right? But they might try to use me to get into my company. And so if I get a funny LinkedIn message, if I get a funny email, you really do have to put that extra time and energy into thinking, could this be part of a greater campaign? And that's really what the nation states are all about, is that long, slow, persistent threat. I think there's probably a song lyric we could come up with for that one as well. but how do you defend against it? I mean, Ron, what's your perspective?
So Jordan highlights some really good points. This has been around, and we talked about in our prior discussion that the evolution, the transfer of traditional types of activity, both from a positive and a negative perspective, the world is transferring into the digital environment, and so criminal and nefarious activity is transferring into the digital environment also. And this is just another one of those, another example of exactly that. This type of activity has been around since nations have been nations. The competition between nations for a variety of purposes has been in existence forever. And so this activity and this competition, nations attacking other nations or trying to obtain things from each other, has just transferred into the online world. And we've seen this since back in the late 1990s and early 2000s. It's been going on as the internet has grown. So has this as a technique of looking to obtain information. So at each step of advancement and development, this has been a part and parcel to what we see. And it's not going to change. That's not going to change anytime in the near future, because the future only looks more and more connected. And success in the future from a national perspective and a global perspective is going to be exactly that, more and more connected with everything that we do. Jordan highlighted, the more information that you put out there on the internet or out in the open environment, the more potential attack vector opportunities you provide. She's spot on. That's completely accurate. But she also highlighted that you have to strike a balance. And I know people also, just like Jordan has highlighted, who steer clear of anything on the internet because they recognize that that is a method of being exposed to potential attack. But you have to be out there and part of this environment and part of the ever-changing dynamic universe that is the internet and the digital world, to be able to know what's going on and to defend and respond. There are some things that everybody can do in a general context, and we talk about that in a number of with clients in a number of different formats. Basic hygiene, and we talked about that in our last presentation. Basic hygiene is a good example. So keeping patches, software patched, keeping your operating systems patched, keeping your applications patched, limiting the type of access that you allow any of your users to have. We talked about RDP as a potential remote desktop protocol, as a potential exploitation vector in the last discussion. Well, if everybody doesn't need to have that as part of their tool set, then limiting that just limits the number of people who could potentially have it exploited as part of their capabilities. Same thing for administrative control. If everybody doesn't need to have admin access on their access point to the network, limiting that prevents users from potentially being exploited, regardless of whether they have good security protocols or bad security protocols. So these are just some of the basic things, really basic things. To get more advanced as far as things that we recommend, depending upon the capabilities of people that we advise, having a good, robust logging audit system, really watching, knowing what's happening on your network at any given time, but monitoring that, not just collecting logs, but really looking at the logs for changes to what is a baseline of activity. If you see activity on your network that happens typically between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m., but then there's a spike in activity at 2 a.m. for a period of time, that's an anomaly that should be investigated, because it has potential indicators of a technique or a tactic that would be seen by a nefarious actor. So there are a lot of different things you can do. Most of the starting points that we talk about as far as defensive mechanisms for these really focus on, start with the basics, do the basics really well, and then continue to improve upon those basics and get more and more advanced as you grow and evolve.
Yeah, and recently, FTI put out some great information following the SolarWinds attack. I know I saw several of those, and Ron, you were gracious enough to share some of those. Is there anything about the SolarWinds and the others that are recent and still kind of impactful and have the opportunity to represent themselves in another package, if you will, that you want to speak about?
Yeah, I mean, SolarWinds, in my view, is basically exactly what I'm worried about in the government. I mean, exactly. It is the concept of a nation state actor finding a undetected place to sit and observe traffic in and out of the most sophisticated government and private sector entities in the world. I mean, it is basically, if I was drawing a picture of exactly what I think the worst it could be, that would be it. And then, of course, just weeks later, Microsoft comes out and says that there's been these issues for their on-prem Exchange servers, right? And so the Hafnium attacks. And so I think I was thinking earlier about, it's kind of, SolarWinds and Hafnium and bears. Oh my! I mean, how do we both get ready to address all of these issues, but also how do we keep our professionals like you guys from having fatigue? I mean, these are some of the most sophisticated threats that I've ever seen in my career of working on these risks. So how do we keep everybody's kind of eyes wide open to how serious these threats are? I mean, in the case of both of these events, one thing we have seen is some great information sharing from the government, some really aggressive and timely sharing of info as well as tools from DHS to CISA, from the FBI, and from others. And so the problem still remains that the ingest of that is very difficult, and there's not really one place, a one-stop shop for cybersecurity threat information. So I think, are we still continuing to keep our eye on the threat? Absolutely. We're working with lots of companies that have been impacted by this. But I think what it's going to do going into the future is changing people's views of their vendors. So if you think of SolarWinds as a vendor, as a service, and in this case, a service that people thought was keeping them more secure. And of course, SolarWinds has some things that do and did and still are keeping people more secure. How do we incorporate the right types of security outside tools that we need? And the reason why I say that is because a homegrown security approach is not one that I often see be incredibly effective. Organizations that are building everything from the ground up and trying to figure out how to piece things together. On the counterpoint, when an organization goes out and buys every security tool available and just sort of throws them up like a piecemeal, and they're not sure what's doing what and who's my firewall and I'm not sure, you have to strike a balance of understanding what outside services you use and what is your process for trusting them. So for all organizations that were impacted by SolarWinds, a best practice would be to say, had I done the right things to vet SolarWinds? Now, in this case, I think that nearly anyone that had a great vendor management program probably did, because SolarWinds is a very reputable company that was making very, very accurate and reputable representations about their capabilities. So I think what it probably won't necessarily change behaviors dramatically. I don't think we'll see a hard right turn now, but I think what we will see is people will be very aware of what the introduction of additional presences in their workspaces, what those risks are. And I think we just need to know that nation state actors are going to continue to look for this kind of perfect story, which is the perfect story of SolarWinds. And we are not secure, right? We are not safe. Our information is not safe. Even if you do everything right, you can still be at risk. And I think this really highlights that.
Yeah, Jordan brings forward a couple of really important points, things that we started talking about in our last discussion about responsibility, whose responsibility is to bring security forward. The SolarWinds event is a great demonstration of what we were describing as it's everybody's responsibility. The concept of vendor management, third-party management, these are essential issues that everyone has incorporated into life today. Every big business, the government, all of the infrastructure sectors, it's all a partnership. None of us, and Jordan highlighted homegrown security, homegrown capabilities. Not a lot of people utilize their own homegrown self-built software, self-developed software applications and things of that nature. So there is a mesh that we form to implement business, whether it's from the government perspective, from the private sector perspective, finances, healthcare. We all establish a mesh that is our lifeblood online. That mesh of services, of capabilities, includes third parties, includes vendors. And the more that we implement our own security process, the better and the more that we will expect those third parties and vendors to implement appropriate security process. And so it really is a good example of security and the concept of security as, and Jordan used this term, as a team sport. We're all part of the solution. This is something that, that requires all of our participation to be as successful as we can. And even then, there are risks that we will not be able to completely eliminate from that landscape. And so we work, and we work together to deal with those. Communication, and Jordan highlighted this, also critical to success, and it's certainly getting better, but it's going to be even more and more important, particularly when it comes to these type of nation state adversaries, those type of attacks, because of the nature of the patient persistent exploitation that they use, and the potential damage that they can cause in a network. And really exposure of information in a network.
And so you touched on this a little bit, Jordan, in terms of where you think that we're headed. And obviously, you're never going to eliminate every threat coming. It's just not possible, right? That's just the world that we live in. But striking that balance. So if you have, because we have probably 3 to 5 minutes left, so I would love for you and Ron to kind of give us where you think we're headed. Anything that like I said, you've touched on so many great things for people to counter and be thinking about, and easy practices they can put into place. And so when you were back talking, I always think about the folks who say, I don't want to install the updates on my phone, then everything stopped working and my apps move around and I can't get in. I have to re-log into everything. And then I always go, but how much longer is it going to take you to fix on the back end if you don't have this little bit of work on the front end, right? So that's always my thing, is you want to do all this work on the back or on the front? So where do you think we're headed?
Yeah.
And
well, that's such a funny point that you make, Stacey, about people updating their machines and devices. And it really takes me back to my days in the government, talking about vulnerabilities and flaws, in particular, that often what a security community professional might call a flaw or a bug, that's often called a feature when you're in the tech world, right? So figuring out that balance between things working certain ways is a huge discussion that's still ongoing. So where do I think we're going? I actually saw a really interesting but maybe depressing graphic recently that was a chart that went back and showed all cybersecurity strategy type documents that the US government had put out since 1997. And it walked through it was in a chart, a little kind of Excel chart looking thing. And it walked through the recommendations that are kind of the top, let's say top 12 recommendations of things we need to do as a US government, and things that really would help globally to improve the state of cybersecurity. And pretty much each of these documents, maybe 10 different documents or so, had X's in each of these categories. And the reason why it's funny or depressing is because we're still talking about it. So I mentioned to you at the outset that I was working on the national cyber strategy in 2018. I did, but how much of what I worked on has been implemented, I won't tell you, because it'll be depressing even more for a Friday afternoon. So what we need to have happen versus what I think will happen, I hate to use the phrases that people use about kind of the cyber turning point event, but I don't think right now we have made the right changes and decisions to improve our cybersecurity, both individual, companies, and as a nation. So I think that there are other countries that are already having some of those harder questions about escalation, about what are the appropriate responses to cyber events. We could talk about this for hours. But what I think will happen is that America may be a little bit behind the curve. I know that this is a global organization that we're talking to here, but America may be behind the curve. An event may happen that may cause the whole world to wrestle with what do we do when things in the cyber world go bad? And then we'll all be playing catch up to migrate our environments into whatever new framework of thinking has been established. So I think it's going to continue to deteriorate, to get worse, and now that we're in this work from home situation where more and more environments are less managed by corporates that can see less of what's happening on home networks. I think we're just, we're not doomed. It's Friday afternoon and the sun is shining. So I don't want to say that we're doomed, but I am concerned that we are headed for some sort of defining moment that will change the way we think about cybersecurity.
I agree.
So Jordan, I've made a note. That'll be our topic for our next session with y'all, the work from home, because that's a whole nother, that's an hour thing. So yeah, Ron, I'll let you speak. To mean to cut you off, but yeah.
No, my apologies. George's right. Your next good point, definitely work from home is going to be a big issue. I think it's going to continue to grow. As pervasive as technology is as far as our advancement and our continued development as a global society, so are threat actors exploiting that advancement. I think supply chain is going to be a big part of in the future, where threats continue to develop and evolve. Trusted relationships, as critical as it is in utilizing different forms of encryption, tokens, keys to establish and maintain trusted relationships. I think those are going to be areas that are continuously attacked in the future. And then really, I think one of the areas we will see, because we're not, and Jordan highlighted this, we often perform in a reactionary context to things of this nature. Even though we try to get ahead of the curve to beat the bad guys to the punch, we're often not successful in doing that. And so advanced technologies, whether or not it's machine learning, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, those type of things, those are going to be technologies, and those are just a few, just the things that roll off the tip of the tongue. Those are areas, that type of continued advancement and development, those are areas that these adversaries are working on exploiting now. And as they continue to develop and we continue to look at, from a global perspective, implementation of new, just extraordinary, awesome developments, the greatest of the technical advancement opportunities that our society presents, particularly these adversaries are going to look to find their way into those specific technical advancements to be a step ahead of the curve as they're rolled out. That way, they will work to be integrated and already have exploit opportunities built into those different areas of advancement as they're being rolled out from a societal perspective. It definitely is going to continue. There's no indication anywhere that I've seen that would tell me that it's going to do anything but to proliferate and to grow and to permeate other areas that are becoming more and more online and part of the digital world.
See a couple things rolling in on the chat. Ben, I don't know if there's anything, I can see it rolling, but I can't see the whole screen. So we are about that time to take Q&A. I think if you've got, if anyone's on the call that has a specific question, if you've not put in the chat, please feel free to unmute and ask your question. We would love to answer any questions that you have while Ben is taking a look at the chat and see if there's any questions or those early questions that rolled in, Ben, if there's not any in there.
Yeah, why don't we start with one of the early questions? Why don't we start with this one? This is kind of more of an opinion type question, but how do we de-escalate nation-state cyber attacks that could have further impacts beyond their initial target? So I think this is kind of hitting at any type of attack that is maybe targeted at a larger entity, maybe the government, but ends up having effects to sort of everyday normal citizens.
Ron, you want to take that first?
Sure, no problem. There are two things that I would say as far as de-escalation. One, and we've already talked about this, we have to be better at, and I see a number of comments in the chat talking about this is not a if it will happen, it's a when it will happen, changing the mindset, changing the whole approach to cybersecurity. That's all, I group all of that in the context of we have to be better. We have to get better in doing our job, our part of this symbiotic relationship and being part of the cycle of cybersecurity, from a mindset and a culture shift within each organization to having cybersecurity being part of the funding process, part of the budget for every private sector organization to government organization. We have to be better. I'll keep that part's just simple. And the other thing is there have to be consequences. We as a society, there have to be consequences that are imposed in some context on actors who take it upon themselves, for whatever the reason, to attack or exploit or compromise networks that are part of our this country. Those are the two areas that I would highlight, areas from it. We got to get better. We have to make it harder for them to do this, make it so expensive and so challenging to compromise the networks to implement their trade that they're dissuaded from doing it. And there have to be consequences if they are successful. As we conduct investigations and identify them, we have to bring that forward so there are real consequences to the actions.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the only thing I would add is attribution. I think attribution is a key point in de-escalation. The name and shame game against nation states that would use cyber means to affect their outcomes and their goals. I think letting them know that we're doing a great job in threat intelligence and we're making attribution is really important. I see a question here I think we can take on about solar winds and sunbursts as a test for the next thing and training grounds for additional events. I think if it's a test, I mean, everything in cybersecurity is a test for the next thing, right? That's kind of my initial reaction. I don't think strategically it necessarily is because of the incredible access that it allowed them. But I think we would be suffering from a failure of imagination to not think that the success there, just as I described, a nation state coming in and an actor who's working for another country has a list of targets. I had no way think that whoever was responsible for the SolarWinds compromise, that they checked the box and said, well, great, we got in here and I guess we're done. I mean, we don't even have to look at anything else. And even when discovered, I don't anticipate that at that point they said, oh, let's try to get into some other places. I anticipate that every major tool and service that your companies use has been put, has faced challenges of potential impacts. And probably at varying degrees of success, right? So, I mean, honestly, I think about the fact that I'm sitting here on my ThinkPad machine that's issued by FTI. What a great win it would be if a nation state infiltrated the supply chain of every ThinkPad machine and was able to put in a chip that was connecting back to a nation state, info center, if you will. And so I think that I don't know that it's a testing ground in a strategic way, meaning I don't think there's you couldn't find a strategy document that says, let's see how this SolarWinds thing plays out and we'll use that as a framework for our future actions. But I think it is in the sense that this is still happening at other organizations right now that we don't know about yet. And it will continue to happen. And its success, if anything, has buoyed people to do this more often, more regularly, because they know it can work now. And so whether we'll be more ready, that is up to us.
Great. I love that, Jordan. Thank you so much. Ben, was there anything else that popped in there?
Nothing from the chat. We could go to one of the other prepared questions. So we kind of talked about this one already in terms of how you guys think that there'll be kind of this next big thing type attack. But in terms of the two more recent nation state attacks that we've seen recently, can we expect these types of attacks to become kind of the regular, the more routine type attack?
Lauren, you want to take that?
I don't know that they will become more routine because of the complexity of the attacks and because of the expertise of the threat actors who execute them. But Jordan's point is spot on. This is certainly not the end. It is always a test and experimentation and a validation of their ability to do this. We certainly will see it in the future. It's certainly, I don't believe in any context that it's going to go anywhere or shift or change. But it is without question, we're going to see this continue to be part of the future. They're going to continue to look for these opportunities. And as far as how much it grows, it's going to be part of our future. I think that's the easiest way to say it. It definitely is going to be part of our future and part of where attackers look to exploit us in bigger, broader ways, and they'll be more brazen. Jordan's right. The attackers once they're in and they've got access, they have keys to the kingdom as far as ability to do a variety of different things, and they stay there for a good period of time and really do the research. And we're going to see more of that. We are definitely going to see more of that.
Great. Well, I think we are just about right on time for our webinar today. So I wanted to ask everybody, if it's not an inconvenience that doesn't have their camera on, if they can turn their camera on. I would love to take a quick group pic today and thank Jordan and Ron for a great job that they did today. So if you can, oh, Ben, will you put that back up? Because now I just have Ron as a full screen. I just have Ron. I'll pop up and I'll take a quick group picture. And if no one else has any additional questions, I do want to say thanks. Thanks, Megan. I do want to say, Madison, for coming out today, providing this great information. The contact information is also up on the screen. So please, if you have additional questions or partnership opportunities with FTI for you or your companies, or maybe you have career aspirations with FTI, please feel free to reach out to someone on their team. I'm sure they can put you in touch with folks. So I'm going to take us a little quick group photo. So thanks for coming out today and supporting us, supporting Women in Cybersecurity Around the World event. It's great to see all your faces. I hope everyone is safe from the crazy weather that was kind of going across the U.S. yesterday. Hopefully nobody had any damages or problems from that. But thank y'all for coming out and supporting us, and have a wonderful weekend. Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Ben.
Everyone.
Thank you, Evan. Have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend.